Hi, management students. This is Steve Wagner, and this is a brief lecture on material from Chapter 6 that covers performance analytics. In this brief lecture, I'm going to talk about the useful components of performance appraisal forms, and I'm going to also address the various kinds of meetings involved in the performance management process. Now, while performance management is not just about rating performance, the forms that we use to evaluate performance are very important. Usually, a form starts out with basic employee information. So the employee's name, the job title, the department. You certainly would want to have information about the dates of the evaluation period, number of years that the supervisor has worked with the employee. Next, we get into how we measure performance. And we've talked extensively about accountabilities, objectives, and standards. Those are the results that are expected. We also should have information about competencies and other behavioral indicators. We might have information about major achievements. We've talked about management by objectives. And so there may be specific strategically oriented goals that have been stated, and an area where people can speak to those achievements would be very important. The performance evaluation process is often linked with professional development, and so we may want to have something on developmental achievements, although sometimes this is included in a separate form or as a separate process. The results of performance review may lead to the identification of performance needs or the development of new specific development plans or goals. Again, this in some instances might be part of a separate form or process. Now, performance touch points refers to the fact that you might have multiple people involved in evaluating a person. So you might, for instance, include customer feedback or internal customers or peers, or the person that you're evaluating might have subordinates. And so we might be getting evaluation information from various touch points. The employee should have the opportunity for comments in order to reflect on the evaluation that he or she is being given. And there should be room for signatures for both the employee and for the person evaluating him or her. Now, when we think about the performance appraisal form and you look at the various examples in the book, you can see that they take many different forms. But there are some features that we should strive for. One is simplicity. We should think about how user-friendly is this form. Is it something that a manager, it will be easy for them to complete? Will it be clear? Will it be concise? Is it too long? Is it too complicated? Is it something where the employee is not going to understand how they performed or how they should prioritize their future performance? These are all questions we should ask in terms of gauging the simplicity. The form should also be relevant to the tasks and responsibility of the job. In my experience, there's often a drive to have a generic form that addresses all types of jobs. And while that can be effective, within that, there has to be enough areas where information can be tailored in order for the form to be relevant. And so usually this comes in where there is a space of making specific goals or objectives that pertain to individual positions. The form should be descriptive, and so it should provide the opportunity for the rater to give clear evidence of the performance. So it's not just circling numbers, but actually gives an opportunity to describe specific instances of performance that exemplify why a person is being given a specific evaluation. As I said earlier, it should be adaptable. So different managers should be able to tailor the form to different types of jobs. There should be spaces where things can change. It's better if we have a comprehensive form, something that covers all areas of performance. As we discussed previously in the class, oftentimes the contextual performance or the organizational citizenship behaviors aren't addressed in performance evaluations. And so that's something we should consider in order to make a appraisal form more comprehensive. There should be definitional clarity. And so when we're talking about behavioral indicators and results, they should be described with a high level of specificity. So different people reading the form understand it the same way. We want to be sure that the form is a means for communicating. Ultimately, if we are managing performance, there has to be clear communication of expectations. And that is being formalized on this form. And so we need to ask ourselves, is the form facilitating this kind of communication, or is it an obstacle to this kind of communication? And we have to be sure that the form has a time orientation. And so it doesn't just address the past, but also addresses the future. Now, ultimately, many decisions from the performance appraisal process come from an overall rating. And the question is, how do we get that overall rating that might determine whether a person receives merit pay or whether that person is considered eligible for promotion? Now, there's different ways we can do that, but the two general ways are a judgmental strategy and a mechanical strategy. So in a judgmental strategy, the person giving the evaluation looks at all the ratings that have been given and creates a summary and comes to an overall rating. It's kind of like a clinical judgment. It's what is their best judgment of the overall rating of this individual. Now, another strategy is to determine the overall rating in a mechanical way, to basically have an algorithm where the different parts that are evaluated are combined mathematically to come up with an overall rating. Now, that could be a simple kind of additive process, but in many instances, certain parts of the job are more important than others. And so it might involve weighting some areas of the evaluation higher than others when we come up for that overall score. As we said earlier, a good performance appraisal form has descriptiveness. And that means that there are specific descriptions of performance enactment that exemplify the ratings that are being given. But it can also be very challenging. It is difficult to use and to record this kind of qualitative information. Also, supervisors are not always very effective at making open-ended comments. Sometimes they are too brief, sometimes they are too long. So as we talk about later in this course, training for performance review is very important. And in doing that, we shouldn't forget training on open-ended comments. And when we think about performance management, thinking about it as a process that involves many different interactions. This describes different kinds of formal meetings that need to take place during a performance management process. Now, some of these can be combined. Some of these can take place multiple times over the course of a year. All of these should occur in a complete cycle of the performance management. There needs to be a time when you inaugurate the performance management process, where you create the goals going forward, where you explain the process of performance assessment. And that's the system inauguration. As part of this, there should be self-appraisal going on, where the employee is evaluating him or herself. It's very useful for a manager to receive these self-appraisals before that manager makes his appraisal of that employee. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with that self-appraisal. Again, there may be some inflation of one's self-appraisal, but it's good to know what they are thinking before you write out your own performance. Now, the third type of formal meeting is the classical performance review, where you sit down and you look at the accountabilities and the goals and the competencies, and you ascribe some kind of performance evaluation. And that, again, may take place multiple times. It doesn't have to just be once a year. It could be twice a year. It could be 4 times a year, depending on how often you're going to process that information. As part of this, there should be a connection to the person's merit. So if there is some bonus that a person receives, pay for performance, or if there is some salary change connected with a performance review. Now, sometimes that can take place with the classical performance review, but I think we have to be careful in terms of cramming too much into that one meeting. And so I think it's better to have more meetings that are shorter meetings and more focused than trying to have one big meeting that includes multiple components like this. Again, there should be also a connection to professional development and looking at a person's performance assessment and identifying how they might go forward. Again, the development plan could involve a self-appraisal of development along with the supervisor contributing to that development plan. And then finally, there needs to be some setting of new goals, new objectives. Strategies change over time. The challenges faced by departments change, and so the person's goals shouldn't be static. They should be changed, and again, they should be something that is discussed between the manager and that subordinate so that they are strategically relevant, so that they are challenging yet achievable, so that they are measurable, so that they're based in time. All of that objective setting, again, should be part of a dialogue that is taking place.